You might think sleeping under the stars in the Wild West sounds peaceful, romantic even. A soft breeze, a crackling fire, the sky stretched out wide above like a great blue blanket stitched with stars. And sometimes it is. But the truth is, the plains don't sleep easy. Not for cowboys. Not out here. Because once the fire fades and the chill sets in, the wind starts to speak. It rustles the canvas. It creeps through the seams. It brings with it every whisper and worry the prairie's been holding on to. Inside a cowboy's tent, there's no lock, no door, no solid walls, just a thin sheet of cloth between you and whatever is moving out there in the dark. And yet, the very same night that holds its quiet dangers can also rock you gently to sleep, if you let it. And the last light cast long shadows through the tall buffalo grass, turning everything gold and still. My horse, Bandit, was grazing slow and lazy, tail flicking at flies. I'd ridden hard that day, following a cattle drive until they split east. And I decided to head out on my own, just me, a small canvas tent, and the open prairie. That's how it was for me. It started on a late October evening, somewhere between Dry Hollow and Dead Colt Crossing. The sun had dipped below the ridge, saddle for a pillow, and a tin lantern tucked near the flap. I staked it down tight and spread my bedroll inside. Wool blanket, the kind of setup that looks lonesome if you've never been alone before. But for me, it was familiar. It's not the big dangers that keep you awake. It's the little ones, the ones that hide in the quiet, even welcome. I set camp where the land folded gently into a shallow draw. It was a good spot, shielded from wind, with just enough brush to start a fire and a nearby stream gurgling quietly in the distance. Nothing fancy, just enough. A soft orange glow licking at the edges of the dark. Coyotes had started to sing out somewhere off to the west. Not close, but close enough. Their calls weren't threatening, just part of the music of the night. The tent went up fast, practiced hands making short work of it. The fire was burning low by the time I settled in. I lay back and listened to it all, timed it with the rhythm of the tent swaying gently in the wind. I let the stories of the day drift out of my mind like smoke from the fire. I thought about the stars and how they'd watched over this land long before I ever pitched a tent here. The flap of the canvas in the wind, the creak of Bandit's saddle as he shifted, the occasional pop from the firewood, even the whistle of the grass rubbing together in the breeze. That's the thing most folks don't understand about the plains. Was that a twig snapping? Or just the fire settling? Did something brush against the tent? Or was it the wind? You start asking questions like that around midnight, and suddenly, sleep feels like something you've got to earn. But I wasn't afraid. I'd learned long ago that the plains weren't out to get you. They just wanted you to pay attention. And so, I did. I let my breathing slow, and somewhere between a rustle and a sigh, I felt myself drifting. Because danger or not, the prairie has a way of lulling you to sleep, if you trust it. And on that first night, I did. The prairie has its own kind of rhythm, and once you fall into it, the world changes. You stop hearing noise, and you start hearing patterns, subtle ones. That, more than anything, roused me. The flap of the tent in the wind is no longer random. It becomes a slow breath. The crack of a twig in the distance. I send T an alarm. It is just a note in the evening's long song. That's how I woke up. Not to a sound exactly, but to a shift in that rhythm. The wind had stilled. Stillness out here can mean many things. I lay in my bedroll, eyes open, body warm beneath the blanket, listening. The canvas of the tent no longer moved. The grasses outside no longer whispered. Even Bandit, usually restless with his tail or hooves, had gone silent. The kind of silence that presses in. Not threatening, just watching. I didn't move. Just breath slow and easy. Then, after what felt like minutes, I heard it. Didn't reach for the rifle either. Steady in my breath. Eyes staring up at the canvas ceiling glowing faintly with starlight through the seams. That would have broken the spell. A single rustle. Close. Deliberate. Not wind. Not fire. Something had passed near the tent. A coyote sniffing around. A badger poking its nose into camp. Even a wandering deer drawn to the smell of oats. Couldn't handle the weight of silence pressing down. Not brushing it, just near. Now, out here, that could mean a few things. But I didn't light the lantern. You learn to read the wind, the sky, the way animals move. You learn to tell the difference between danger and mystery, between noise and story. Same kind of night, dry, cold, quiet. But when I woke, there'd been small prints all around my tent. Dozens of them, not coyotes, not deer, looked almost like tiny human feet. Instead, I just lay still. There's a rule out here. If you panic, you lose the night. But if you wait, really wait, the land will tell you what's what. Not harmful, just curious. Sure enough, the sound faded. Just seen. A warm breath of air from the east, desert-born and soft as velvet, drifted across the tent seams. A shuffle in the grass, then another. Lighter now. Listened to the world do its thing. Trusted it to carry me through. Moving on. But inside the tent, the wool blanket trapped enough heat, and I was still wrapped in the day's weariness. I let out a slow breath. Whatever it was, it had lost interest. And the wind picked up again, a whisper returning to its story. I turned slightly, adjusting the saddle under my head. The fire outside had faded to embers, casting only the faintest warmth against the night. The tension eased from my shoulders, and I found myself thinking about how often I'd done this pitched camp alone. It wasn't always like this. There was a time I couldn't sleep without a roof over my head, couldn't trust the dark. But the land teaches you. Not fast, not loud, but it teaches. That trust comes slow, like water shaping stone. And sometimes, the stories you hear aren't ones you expect. Like this one time, months before, I'd camped near Snake's Bend. Some said the old tribes believed in prairie spirits. Watchers, they called them. I don't know if that's true, but I didn't feel scared. Nights like that, like this, remind you how small you are. Not in a bad way, in a peaceful way. Like you belong to something bigger, and it's watching over you, quiet and patient. The canvas above me swayed again, and I felt the cold retreat just a little. I let my eyes close once more. The stars outstayed steady. Bandit shifted his weight, snorted once, then settled. And the quiet dangers of the prairie became nothing more than the wild humming itself to sleep. By morning, the world had changed. I woke to a soft blue light filtering through the canvas, that early kind of dawn, the kind that doesn't ask you to rise just yet, but lets you know the night's passed safely. The fire had gone cold, just a little pile of gray ash and blackened wood. The air still carried a chill, and when I sat up, I could see my breath drift toward the tent's peak before vanishing. His coat was cold but dry, but a fresh handful of kindling and a few dry sticks sparked back to life with a little patience and flint. I set the coffee tin near the flame and waited as the water inside began its slow simmer. And he gave me a look like he was ready to ride or eat. Probably both. Bandit nickered softly from outside. No tracks in the dirt, but they don't care if you vanish. Respect that, as she might just let you stay a while. No chewed leather or scattered gear. Whatever passed through had come and gone like a shadow in a dream, leaving behind a pale sky, promising clear skies and colder winds. I wasn't in a rush. Hadn't been for a long while. That's another thing about riding alone. Your pace is your own. No one waiting, no one rushing you along. Just the wind and the sun and the miles ahead. I heard him paw the ground, hungry probably, and I smiled. Each night was a new story. Each fire, a new chance to listen. Something about that spot felt different. Not sacred, exactly, but like it had held me gently through the night. And I wanted to leave it the same way. Not really. And gave him a soft heel. He turned south, as if reading my thoughts, and we started off through the grass, the morning sun warming our backs. But it stayed with me, that sense of being watched, or maybe not being alone, in the way I'd always thought I was out here. He was always patient in the morning, kissing the tops of the grass and warming the earth inch by inch. The sky was painted in gentle oranges and soft lavender streaks, stretching so wide it made your chest ache a little, like the horizon was reminding you how far you could still go, but never quiet about his oats. I pulled on my boots, still a little stiff with frost, and stepped outside into the prairie's quiet breath. There's nothing like the light of morning on the plains. It doesn't break over the land. It spreads slow and golden. I walked over to Bandit and gave him a rub between the ears. I poured him a measure of grain from the saddlebag and left him to his chewing while I tended to the fire pit. The coals were long gone. As I sat there, boots crossed at the ankles and coat pulled tight against the breeze, I thought about the night again. That rustle, that presence, nothing had disturbed the sight. I wasn't bothered by it. It made me remember something my old trail boss, Holt McCready, once told me. The plains don't hate you, he said. I never forgot that. After coffee, I took my time packing up. Before I struck the tent, I stood for a moment and looked around. To the east, the grass swayed like a golden sea, quiet and endless. To the west, the last stars faded, and all around, silence, not empty, but full of stories. As I took the tent down, folded the canvas, and rolled the bedroll tight, I found myself moving slower than usual. I mounted Bandit, tugged the reins gently. The trail ahead was long, and I didn't know where I'd make camp next. That's how I liked it. And as we rode, I thought back on that silence, that rustle, that hush in the air that only the prairie could offer. Because sleeping on the plains wasn't just about rest. It was a kind of listening. And the quiet, well, it always had more to say. By mid-morning, the sky had taken on that deep, endless blue, the kind that only appears over open land with no buildings, no mountains, and nothing but sky from here to forever. The wind was soft, steady, and cool, and now and then, a lone tree broke the horizon like an exclamation mark in a long, quiet sentence. There wasn't much sound, save for Bandit's breath and the steady jingle of the reins. It was the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones, brushing against my face like a river's breath. Bandit walked with a patient rhythm beneath me, hooves brushing through tall grass and scattering grasshoppers into the breeze. We weren't following a trail. Not really. This wasn't the stillness of morning waking up. It was heavier, like the prairie had paused, mid-thought. No wind, no birds. Even Bandit stopped lapping at the water and raised his head, ears twitching. I dismounted to let Bandit drink what little pooled in a shaded hollow. I knelt beside him, dipped my fingers in the cool water, and let it drip slowly down my wrist. Just heading south, where I'd heard there might be work fixing fences at a ranch near Willow Bend. There was a worn-out trail leading through them, just a pair of faint wagon ruts, half swallowed by grass. I followed it a little ways until I found a half-collapsed corral and the remains of an old campfire ring. Someone had stayed here once, long ago. I wasn't in a hurry to get there. The land rolled in soft rises and dips. The sun filtered through in patches of gold, dancing on the ground like fireflies. I unpacked the tent, but didn't set it up yet. Wanted to let the light stretch a little longer. After a while, I passed a dry creek bed, the kind that only fills when spring storms roll in heavy. That's when I noticed it again. The air smelled like dry earth and cedar smoke from the old stones. Maybe, or a memory hanging in the bark. Stillness, different than before. I stood slowly and looked around. Nothing but grass, no movement. Maybe it remembered every soul who'd ever passed through. Settlers, cowboys, drifters, outlaws. Maybe their footprints didn't fade so easily. Maybe the ground still whispered their stories on nights like this. And then, the faintest tremble underfoot. Just for a second. I pressed a hand to the earth. Waited. Nothing. Whatever it was, it had passed. Could have been distant thunder. Could have been a buffalo herd somewhere out of sight. Or maybe nothing at all. Just the land breathing in a way I didn't understand. That's the part that humbles you. Out here, you're not in control. You're not even a guest. You're a whisper. Bandit moved slower at first, eyes scanning the horizon. But eventually, the rhythm returned, one hoof in front of the other, like a lullaby only he and I could hear. A traveler passing through something ancient and alive. I let the moment pass and swung back into the saddle. By late afternoon, I found a cluster of cottonwoods near a bend in the low hills. It felt right. I decided to stay. I set up camp beneath the cottonwoods, their yellowed leaves whispering above in the soft breeze. Instead, I sat on a fallen log and watched the sky. A hawk floated overhead, circling, effortless. The day was fading, and the quiet was rising again. And I could feel it. That same weight, that same invisible presence I'd felt the night before. Not threatening, not exactly, but watching. Maybe it was just the land remembering. I stayed still a long while, listening, and the wind began to move again. The cottonwood sighed. A grasshopper chirped. Bandit stopped once and lowered his head to graze. The moment passed, and I started to believe, just a little, that maybe this place wasn't only watching. Maybe it was listening, too. That evening, the wind carried a cooler bite, a kind that hinted at the season turning. Autumn was giving its last breath before winter came down from the mountains. I boiled coffee and warmed up a tin of beans. Nothing fancy, but the warmth filled me just the same. I sat near the flames, cup in hand, hat tilted back, letting the glow wash over my face as the shadows grew deeper around the camp. I felt it in my fingers as I drove the tent stakes into the hard-packed soil. The air had a sharper edge, and even the fire crackled with a different tone, quicker, hungrier, like it knew the night would be long. The cottonwoods overhead whispered restlessly, their brittle leaves breaking free now and then, spinning downward to settle softly on the ground. Bandit stood tethered nearby, still and calm. I left it beside me, unlit, and listened to the sounds of the night return in pieces. A branch creaked. The leaves whispered again, not frantic, but rhythmic, like breathing. One back hoof resting as he watched me work. Not close, not threatening. That same sense that something bigger than you was listening. Just present. When the fire was strong enough to hold its own. But in the way, a traveler knows they've stepped into a story that has been told 1,000 times before them. I imagined the sky above, the stars watching, the moon rising just out of sight. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, then another. It was what he said after. That dead calm where you wonder if the world's still out there, or if you read the last one left. The land beyond the trees was dark already, just a soft blur of moving grasses and silhouettes, under a moon not yet risen. It was the kind of night that carried its own gravity, like time slowed down once the sun disappeared. But from years back, when I was green and riding with a crew out of Dead Man's Ridge, one of the older hands, Jesse Trout, told us about a time he'd been lost for 3 nights after his horse ran off during a lightning storm. He'd found shelter under a rocky outcrop and listened to the storm rage through the night, and every minute stretched out, waiting to be felt. That's when the memory came to me. It was an old one, not from the trail. What stuck with me wasn't the storm. It wasn't the thunder that shook me, Jesse told us. It was the quiet after. I didn't understand it back then, but I did now. The quiet on the plains wasn't empty. It was full of echoes, of memories, of footsteps, of long-gone voices caught in the wind. The kind of silence that asks you questions without using words. That night, after the last embers dimmed and I crawled into the tent, I didn't light the lantern. A twig snapped. There was something out there. It reminded me of standing in a church when no one else was around. That same reverent hush. I wrapped myself tight in the blanket and closed my eyes. The tent shifted with the breeze, the canvas rising and falling ever so slightly, like the breath of a sleeping creature. And then quiet again, deep, still, whole. As I drifted off, I had the sense that I wasn't alone, not in a fearful way. I wasn't the first to camp there, wouldn't be the last. But for that night, the story was mine. Morning didn't break so much as it breathed its way into camp. A pale light slipped through the seams of the tent, soft and silvery, the kind of dawn that takes its time rising. I opened my eyes slowly, listening first. That is a habit you pick up out here. You don't move until you listen. Just the distant call of a mourning dove and the rustle of Bandit shifting his weight outside. My breath came out in clouds, and the tip of my nose was cold. But the rest of me was warm. A comfort that came not just from the blanket, but from the knowledge that the night had passed quietly. A slow-burning orange that kissed the tops of the grass and painted the cottonwoods gold. Dew clung to the leaves like a scattering of tiny stars, and the entire world seemed to be holding its breath, caught between sleeping and waking. The wind had died down sometime in the night. No more flapping canvas, no creaking branches. I sat up, stretching against the cool air, and felt the stiffness in my shoulders from another night on the hard ground. I stepped outside and was greeted by the kind of sunrise that makes you pause. The horizon glowed with a gentle fire before movement. Rolled the tent carefully, shook the frost from the canvas, and folded it with care. Every movement felt deliberate, respectful, like I was leaving a place of quiet importance. And somewhere, faint on the breeze, I thought I heard a sound, not an animal, not the wind. Before decisions, not looking for tracks, I didn't expect to find any. Just saying goodbye, in my own way. Not in words, but in presence. A hush in the trees. A shadow that wasn't there before. A feeling that you've stepped into someone else's footsteps, even if the trail's long gone, when the world simply was. I climbed up onto Bandit and gave him a gentle nudge with my heel. We turned away from the cottonwoods and headed back toward the open plains. In the distance, a line of mule deer moved silently across a ridge, single file, silhouettes against the light. Cupping the tin mug in both hands, letting the heat seep into my fingers. If anything, I felt more connected. Like the prairie had opened its arms, let me step a little closer, and showed me something few others noticed. I thought about the last 2 nights, the rustles, the quiet watchers, the feeling of not being entirely alone. I watched them for a long while, barely breathing. I walked to the edge of camp, looking out over the prairie. This was the part of the morning I loved most. After feeding Bandit and warming up the coffee, I sat back by the fire. I didn't feel fear. The land out here has layers, not just dirt and stone, but memory, echo, spirit. Most folks ride through, never seeing it. But if you camp long enough, listen long enough, it starts to speak. I packed up slow that morning. Before I saddled Bandit, I walked a wide circle around the camp, just once. The wind had started to pick up again. A soft push from the west. It carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. A voice? A laugh? A whisper? I stood still, listening. But it didn't come again. Maybe it was my imagination. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe some stories aren't meant to be explained, just experienced. With the saddle cinched and the gear packed, the trail ahead was long and quiet, and I welcomed it. By midday, the sun had climbed high and bright, burning away the last traces of frost and setting the plains aglow with soft amber light. Bandits' hooves fell in a steady rhythm, thudding gently against the dry earth, and the wind was mild again, carrying with it the scent of mesquite and distant sage. We hadn't seen another soul since leaving the cottonwoods. Like the echo of a familiar song. Just wide, open land. The kind that stretches on forever, faces you haven't seen in years. I found myself thinking about Sarah. Roads you didn't take, broken only by the occasional outcrop of stone or a gnarled cedar clinging stubbornly to the earth. I'd grown used to the solitude, found peace in it. But solitude has a strange way of drawing thoughts out of you. Memories, mostly. Quiet ones you don't speak of. When I was younger, riding dispatch between Fort Riley and Bent's Post, I'd camp out in places like this, ink a few lines by firelight. Dust caught the sunbeams like snowflakes, swirling through the broken windows. An old iron stove lay on its side in one corner, and beside it, a tin cup, rusted but whole. Fold them neat and post them when I got back to town. As we crested a ridge and paused for a moment of rest, her name always came back to me on the quiet days, not in a loud or aching way, just present. Nearby, the remains of a small cabin slouched into the hillside, roof gone, walls bent inward. Someone had lived there once. Mounted up again and rode on, slower this time. Maybe loved there too. We'd written letters once. It wasn't much, but it had shelter from the wind and a good line of sight in every direction. When even the land seems to settle its shoulders and exhale. Thin clouds stretched across the blue, pulled like wool by the high-altitude winds. The light turned softer, more golden, and I began to look for a place to camp. She wrote me back every time, careful handwriting, always ending with a line like, "Come home safe. The porch still creaks in the morning." But time moves and distance stretches. I took longer rides, worn at the corners, folded soft from being read too often. I hope the stars keep watch wherever you sleep. I never opened it anymore. I knew the words by heart. She stopped writing. Or maybe I did first. I can't say for sure. The grass grew taller, more golden, and clusters of wild sunflowers nodded beside the trail. The earth was drier here, with little cracks splitting through the dust like old scars. Still, I carried her last letter with me. The night wind sounds lonelier without you. Funny how a single sentence can live with you for years. As Bandit and I moved on, the land began to change, a subtle shift. I passed a crumbling fence line, half swallowed by weeds. I dismounted and wandered closer, curiosity tugging at my boots. Inside, the air was still. I imagined a man warming his hands over a fire, a woman folding quilts, a child playing with carved horses on the floor. It was quiet now, but not empty. Places like this, they hold on to things. Whispers in the floorboards, warmth in the walls, laughter tucked into corners. I stepped back out and let the door hang crooked behind me, because it's hard not to feel reverent when you pass through someone else's silence. By late afternoon, the sky had begun to change. Ahead, I spotted a shallow gulch lined with cottonwood saplings and a few flat stones near a bend in a dry wash. As I unpacked, the air grew still again. Not eerie this time, just calm. The hush that comes before nightfall. And once again, as the fire crackled to life and the tent stood firm against the breeze, I felt it. That presence, like someone or something was out there, watching from just beyond the edge of the firelight. Not a threat, not a ghost, just company. And I didn't mind it. Not at all. The night deepened with a velvet hush, wrapping the prairie in soft shadows and gentle mystery. The stars, sharp and countless, stretched across the sky like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Their steady glow cast a faint silver light that mingled with the flickering fire, painting the inside of the tent in shifting patterns. A soothing rhythm like a lullaby sung by the plains themselves. I lay back on my bedroll, eyes half closed, letting the quiet wash over me. Just the whisper of the grass, the calls of night birds, and the steady pulse of the earth beneath you. The fire crackled low, sending gentle pops and hisses into the still air. Bandit stood tethered nearby, his breath visible in the cool night, steady and calm. The tent flap stirred softly with the wind. Out here, there's no hum of machines, no buzz of city lights or distant voices. They remind you that the wild isn't tame. It's alive. I thought again about those quiet dangers. The rattlesnake curled beneath a brush, the prowling badger, the eyes that might flicker just beyond the firelight. But those dangers have a way of becoming part of the landscape, part of the night's song. In the way the wind shifts, the way the firelight dances, the way the stars seem to watch with quiet patience. My thoughts grew lighter, drifting away like smoke rising from the fire. And you're just a visitor, distant and haunting, a reminder of the life that moves quietly beneath the stars. Sometimes the wild seems to lean closer, like it wants to tell you something. Not in words, but in feelings. I felt that tonight. A presence not heavy or threatening, but gentle, like a hand resting softly on your shoulder. A whisper meant to soothe, not scare. Sleep came slowly, but surely. The tent flap moved again in the breeze. Outside, a lone coyote's yip echoed. I breathed deeply, the cool air filling my lungs and emptying them slowly. In that moment, between wakefulness and rest, I understood something essential. The plains hold their secrets close. They keep their stories in silence and shadow. And if you listen, truly listen, they'll share a little piece with you. The night wrapped around me like a soft cloak, and I let it. The dawn came quietly, without fanfare, a slow unfolding of pale light that softened the edges of the world. The soft crunch of his hooves blending with the distant rush of a creek. The sky was a canvas of pale pink and gold, promising another clear day on the plains. I awoke to the faint chirping of sparrows and the gentle rustle of leaves, the tent warm against the cool morning air. I thought about the nights spent under this vast sky, the whispers, the rustles, the quiet company of the wild. Outside, Bandit grazed quietly. I felt a deep gratitude for this time. These moments of solitude and reflection that only the open plains can offer. A pulse that beat with the land itself. It spoke of endurance, of resilience, of the unspoken bonds between man and nature. As I stretched and prepared my morning coffee over the dying embers, there was a rhythm here. We rode on, carried forward by the endless story of the West. Packing up camp, mounting Bandit once more, I looked back one last time at the tent, the fire ring, the scattering of cottonwood leaves. The prairie was still watching, still breathing, and so was I with the wind at my back and the horizon ahead. The afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the prairie grasses. I felt the day's weariness settle deep into my bones, a welcome kind of tiredness, earned from miles traveled and moments lived fully. Now painted golden with a touch of early evening, each with their own quiet stories, whispered under starlit skies and rustling cottonwoods. The air was cool and soft, and in the quiet rhythm of the night, carrying the faint scent of sage and the distant call of a meadowlark settling in for the night, so too is the comfort found in that delicate balance. feeling its vastness wrap around me like a soft, familiar blanket. The prairie settled into its nightly song, gentle and endless. As I guided Bandit toward the next bend in the trail, I closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the promise of another night beneath the stars. The tent and campfires of the past days felt like old friends I was leaving behind. Out here on the plains, sleeping was never just about rest. It was about trust in the land, in the wild. It was about learning to listen to the wind, the shadows, and the unseen companions who share the vastness with us. And though the dangers are real, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, I tipped my hat to the open sky, with Bandit beneath me and the trail ahead, and with that, I drifted deep into the quiet, the calm, the endless embrace of the plains.